Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey. And there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 397. We're getting close to episode 400, guys. This is your host, Holly Worton, and I'm back with another solo episode. Today, I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome and how it relates to our hobbies and outdoor adventures, and what to do when you get imposter syndrome with your hobbies and outdoor adventures. But before I get started, I wanted to talk a little bit about last week. So I was really stressed last week. Just a lot of stuff going on, a lot of worries. Lockdown has been just emotionally difficult lately. And I made a mistake on the podcast. So instead of sending my fabulous podcast editor the proper interview file for the interview with Jane Talbot, I sent him a private... So horrified. I sent him a private coaching NLP session that I'd had with Jane last year. I don't even know why I had this recording on my computer. I don't even know what happened. But I sent him the wrong file. So for several hours on Monday, you may have listened to it. That was available as the podcast episode. 100% my mistake, and it was a mistake made as a result of just being really stressed and really worried and not in a good place mentally. And I find that when I'm heading towards burnout or when I'm already burned out, one of the symptoms to me is that I make really ridiculous mistakes. Like, it was really easy to identify that file, which was from last September, was not the interview that we did last Tuesday. But yeah, so these things happen. So that's the explanation for the very weird episode that was available last Monday. Thankfully, last Saturday, I had a really long walk. And I'm training for these ultras this year, and I'm finding that when I walk long distances, it helps my running long distances. And when I run long distances, it helps my walking long distances. It's really good the way they kind of boost each other in terms of training. So I did that. I was out. Left before sunrise. I was out all day. It was just absolutely fantastic. I was on trails that were really quiet, saw very few people despite it being a weekend, and it was just very restorative and regenerative, and I felt a lot better, and I felt a lot better this week. So, do not underestimate the power of outdoors adventures when you're feeling really burned out. Then, of course, on Monday, we got the update for the plans for coming out of lockdown here in the UK, and it's probably what I should have expected, but I guess I was hoping for more. But here we are. So make the most of what you can do in terms of getting outdoors for your daily exercise or whatever it is that you're allowed wherever you live. Make the most of it and try to stay on quiet trails so that you can spend more time out and have less contact with people. It really makes a big difference. I felt a lot better this week, even after hearing the news that, wasn't what I wanted to hear. So do not underestimate the power of getting outdoors, getting in nature, and just helping you to deal with your mental and emotional and physical health in these very weird times that seem to keep going on and on and on. So that's last week. Let's talk about imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is something that's usually talked about in terms of professional situations. Like you get a new job or you get a raise or you get a promotion and you feel like you're not good enough. You feel like you don't belong there. You feel like you're a fraud. It comes up a lot in business when starting a new business. It's just one of those things that, a lot of people experience throughout their lives. It's like an inner experience of believing that you're not as competent as others think you are. So, you were given this raise, you were given this new position. Obviously, some other professional person thought you were good enough to do it, but you internally think they must be wrong because they don't know just how bad I really am. So again, this often happens in professional situations, but I've been noticing that it also happens for me in terms of hobbies and outdoor adventures. So recently, yesterday, I signed up for a new race this year because one of my other races got canceled. So I signed up for a new 50K, which apparently is going to go ahead, and emailed the race director about something. And in it, he happened to click on my link in my email signature and went through to my website and checked me out and came back and said, "Hey, do you know about this other race that I do in July? Would you like to give a talk the night before the race in exchange for a ticket to the race?" And I thought, yeah, great. And so I said yes. And then, as often happens when I say yes to new opportunities, I started freaking out about it. I was freaking out about giving the talk, and I was freaking out about the race because I agreed to do the 100K, which is going to be a stretch for me. I have another 100K planned for September, and I'm on track in terms of training for that, but this is going to be a real stretch. So I'm really thinking I'm probably going to run it for some of it and walk it for some of it and not push myself to run the entire thing because I won't be ready for that, I don't think. So freaking out about those two things, freaking out about not being good enough to run 100K in July, but that's just a practical training thing and I can manage how I move in that race, like I said, running or walking. But also freaking out about giving a talk about like outdoors and naturey stuff to people who are running an ultra marathon trail race. I'm not good enough to do that. I've written all these books and I do all these podcasts and I talk to all these people and like I'm okay with that. But there's something about being asked to speak at this race that triggered my insecurities. So I'm really glad I said yes, because this is definitely going to be a step outside of my comfort zone, both physically and emotionally, talking at this event. But it's a good thing, because it's going to stretch my comfort zone. And it's flagged up this thing about feeling like an imposter. I'm not good enough to speak about nature and outdoorsy stuff to a group of people who are really naturey and outdoorsy. I don't know who I think I'm talking to normally. It's not like I go into corporate situations and talk to them about nature and outdoors adventures. I think I'm talking to people who already like that stuff. But insecurities, they don't always make sense, or often don't make sense. Also, I've noticed, thinking back about imposter syndrome and where it's shown up for me, I also think about it a lot in terms of this podcast. So, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know who listens to this podcast unless someone emails me and says that they do, or they comment on an episode, which I like and which I welcome. But in the last several months, some of the people that I've met through my outdoors classes have found out that I have a podcast, and so they've listened to a couple of episodes. And it makes me feel like an imposter. It really flags up my imposter syndrome because I think these are like super outdoorsy people. They're really more qualified than I am, and yet I'm talking about this stuff that they totally know more about than I do. And I've noticed that's happened to me a couple of times with a few different people. And it's something that it would be good for me to do some mindset work about because I haven't done that yet. And I think it would be useful because that would help me kind of get up to the next level with talking about outdoors adventures and nature stuff in a bigger way. So that's my experience. So what about you? When you think about your hobbies and your outdoor adventures, have you ever felt like you're not as competent in these things as others perceive you to be? Or maybe you're not as good as other people are? Or maybe you feel like you don't belong, you're a fraud. Like maybe you sign up to go to a meetup group back when these things existed, and for whatever your hobby is, and you go there and you see all these people who are more talented or more capable or just better than you, at least in your mind. And so you start comparing yourself to them. Has that ever happened to you? Think about that. I think it's really worth kind of flagging up these situations so that we can do something about them. And I'm going to talk in this podcast about what we can do when we experience imposter syndrome in all areas of our lives, but specifically with hobbies and outdoors adventures. So why do we get this imposter syndrome? Where does it come from? I think it comes from the underlying limiting belief that I'm not good enough. And this is a limiting belief that I'm really experienced with. That is a limiting belief that I have worked through so many times with PSYCH-K, with other modalities. And I've worked with it many times because it's like these limiting beliefs, when they're really, really kind of a big deal for us, they often have layers. So you'll do some mindset work and you'll kind of clear one layer. And then it pops up a few months later, either in a different way or in a different area of your life or in a slightly different way, but it's the same thing. I'm not good enough. And so you do some mindset work and you like peel off that layer and then it pops up again. And I think a lot of people find this frustrating because they think, well, didn't I like get it the first time? But mindset work is like this. I know I haven't talked about mindset work that much in recent podcast episodes, but I used to talk about this a lot. It's like doing mindset work is like going up a spiral staircase. So you take one step is your mindset work. The other step is your practical action in your life. So like times when you step outside your comfort zone and you do new things. So you're stepping. You're going up the spiral staircase. But every once in a while, you come around to that kind of feels like the same point where you hit that same limiting belief. I'm not good enough. But you're at a different layer of it. You're at a different level because you've stepped outside your comfort zone. You've grown. And you're hitting a different layer or a different aspect of this limiting belief. So it's not that the mindset work you did didn't work that first time or second time or third time. It's just this is a new level of this limiting belief. And I think it's really juicy to notice when this stuff comes up for me because I can tell that I've grown because I'm doing so many things that I used to think I wasn't good enough to do. But there are still things that I think I'm not good enough for. So it's really, really useful to notice these things. And I would encourage you to not sweep these feelings under the rug when you experience them, because if you pay attention to them, that's when you can do something about them. So why else do we get this imposter syndrome? It often happens when we compare ourselves to other people. And I did a podcast episode ages ago. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. It was episode 239, and it's called How to Quit the Comparison Game for Good. But I really think, again, it's like you've got layers and you've got that different levels. So yes, you can quit the comparison game for good by doing the things that I talk about in that episode, but you might need to take the steps again when you uncover different layers. So I've really come a long way in terms of comparing myself to other people, and I still do it in other areas of my life. So it's something that I'm still working on. And another thing that's really, really important to pay attention to and to notice when you see yourself doing this. Where else do we get imposter syndrome from? It can come from low self-esteem, low self-confidence. And even if we have improved in terms of self-esteem and self-confidence in recent years, sometimes we've still got a ways to go. We're not perfect. We're never going to be perfect. So if low self-esteem and low self-confidence is something that you've experienced in the past, you might want to pay attention for it and see where it comes up when it comes to your hobbies and outdoors adventures and other areas of your life. So those are some reasons why I think we get imposter syndrome. So how do you know if you have it? So if you've ever felt like you don't belong, if you feel like you're a fraud, if you feel like you're not good enough to be doing what you're doing, whether that's hiking, running, cycling, whatever hobbies and adventures that you partake in, if you ever felt like you're not good enough, that's one symptom. So for example, I'm currently working on a series of books called Plant Spirit Short Reads series. And, I did my Plant Spirit Healing Apprenticeship a couple of years ago and learned a lot there. And I've got experience in working with plant spirits and tree spirits. And yet I've been putting off writing these books since last summer. Why? Because I felt like I wasn't good enough to be writing them. Somehow I got over that, and I'm actively working on the first book, which is about mugwort. But for a long time, I felt like I wasn't good enough to be doing that. Wasn't good enough to be writing a book about it. I wasn't an expert. I wasn't perfect in my knowledge about plant spirits. But this is one of those experiential books where I talk about my experiences. And it's very much like my walking books, where I share my experience of walking a specific trail. And that's another thing. This is another important thing for me to say. So I've written these 4 books about different trails that I've walked. And I've updated the first two. So Alone on the Ridgeway and Alone on the South Downs Way. The Ridgeway book will be published and available by the time this episode goes live. I'm publishing it this weekend. South Downs Way came out last year. This year, I'm redoing the Downs Link and Way South Path books. And part of the reason why I'm doing that is because I have grown as a walker. I've evolved as a walker. I'm a better walker. And I want to share that experience in the books because I was a really new walker when I wrote these books. And so I feel like on one hand, the books are really good for someone who's new to walking long distance trails. But I also have a lot of insecurities about how rough it was for me. Like I really had some challenges when I walked those trails the first time. So I have a bit of that feeling like I'm a fraud. Like, how can I write these books about walking when I'm not a perfect walker? When I make mistakes and I get blisters and I break down and cry on the trail sometimes. That hasn't happened in years, but it certainly happened in the beginning. So I've definitely felt like a fraud and not good enough to be writing books about walking, even though I know that sharing these stories is helpful to people who are new walkers. So it's like the logical part of my brain knows that this is appropriate, but the fear-based part of my brain is like, what are you doing? This is not good enough. So pay attention to any parts of your hobbies or outdoors adventures where you feel like you don't belong, you feel like you're a fraud, you feel like you're not good enough to be doing what you're doing. How else can you know if you have imposter syndrome? Perfectionism. Maybe you try to do things perfectly. You try to be perfect, but you're not. And you get frustrated with yourself when you realize that that's impossible because there's no such thing as perfect. And so you get frustrated with yourself and you kind of fulfills that belief that you're not good enough. Another way to know if you have imposter syndrome, you push yourself harder so that you can prove that you're good enough. And so you set the bar maybe a little too high for yourself. And you push yourself to achieve this goal that's unreasonable, when really you're destined to fail by setting yourself unreasonable goals. And so again, it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You set the bar really high. You push yourself to achieve it. You don't achieve it. So clearly you're not good enough. So this smallness that we have within us, this part of our brains that believes we're not good enough, will often cause us to take actions that will prove to ourselves that we're not good enough. So what do you do about that? One of the answers is mindset work. So do the mindset work for your self-confidence, for your self-esteem. Do the mindset work so that you can step outside of your comfort zone. Do the mindset work so that you can believe that you are good enough, just as you are right now, today. That was one of the main focuses of my heart-centered energy work that I was working with clients with when was that? A couple of years ago when I stopped doing that. And heart-centered energy work is something that I think about all the time. I'm not doing client work anymore. I'm not working with heart-centered energy work for my Patreon group or for myself, but it's something that keeps popping into my mind and I want to bring it back, and I'm probably going to write a book about it because it's such important work and I want it to get out there in a big way. So stay tuned for that. Not this year, but maybe next year. So do the mindset work for yourself. Again, heart-centered energy work aside, you can use something like PSYCH-K, which I talk about all the time, which I will link to in the show notes. You can use NLP. You can use all kinds of things to work with your subconscious mind and transform your mindset. So do the mindset work. Next, celebrate your successes. This is something that I'm reminding myself to do as I suggested to you, because I'm really not good at this. But celebrate your successes. Last month, I ran the equivalent of a marathon. Did I celebrate it? No. This is something that I need to remind myself to do. But every time you reach a milestone, whether it's walking a long distance trail or having a long hike or a long run or whatever it is that you do, celebrate that in some way and give gratitude for what you can do. This is really important. Maybe sit down and do a gratitude list of 10 things for what you can do. So if you're feeling like you're not good enough because you ran a race and you didn't get a certain time, give gratitude for the fact that you can run the race, that you could run the race, that you did get the time that you got, that you have legs that function, that you have legs that take you around. Like, get back to the basics and really dig into giving gratitude for the things that you can do, even though perhaps you didn't achieve what you wanted to achieve. Give gratitude. whether it's every day, once a week, or just when you're feeling down. And this is a good thing that you can do whenever you are feeling imposter syndrome. Get out your journal and write 10 things or 3 things or whatever. I really like pushing myself to write 10 things that I'm grateful for because I feel like it really stretches me to kind of get back to the basics and give gratitude for even the most basic things that I can do, because not everyone has functioning legs and feet and bodies. And that's really important to be grateful for. And I think that really gives me a lot of perspective as well. So give gratitude for what you can do. It's a really easy way to turn around when you're feeling bad or feeling like you're not good enough. It kind of flip your mood and put you in a better headspace. Also, forgiveness. Ho'oponopono. I will link to that in the show notes, but I've talked about that a lot. Forgive yourself for not being good enough. Forgive yourself for having these beliefs that you're not good enough. Forgive yourself for feeling like a fraud, for feeling like an imposter. Forgive yourself for whatever you need to forgive yourself for. And I just do it like a mantra that I just repeat over and over in my mind until I feel better. And that might be just 2 or 3 times sometimes. So it's, I forgive you, please forgive me, I'm sorry, I love you, thank you. There are different versions of this, and if you go online, you'll see different versions. That's the one that I use, and I just repeat it over and over in my head a few times until I feel better. I forgive you, please forgive me, I'm sorry, I love you, thank you. I forgive you, please forgive me, I'm sorry, I love you, thank you. I forgive you, please forgive me, I'm sorry, I love you, thank you. Do that silently in my head. You can do it out loud. And I do it fast like that, just boom, boom, boom. And it really shifts. Again, it shifts my mood. It shifts my mindset. Another idea. If you're going to compare yourself to others, compare down as well as up. So skill and ability is a spectrum, and you're probably not at the bottom of it. So if you run a race, for example, and you think, why do I keep using this as an example? Okay. If you do what I did last week and you walk a long walk, so you have a set number of miles or kilometers that you're going to walk, and you estimate that you're going to walk it in so many hours, but it takes you longer. And you think, oh, it took longer than I thought. I'm not good enough. If you're going to compare yourself to others, compare yourself down and up. So yeah, there are probably people who could walk that faster than you can, but there are probably people that are going to take longer than you. So think about that. I think the reason why I used a race as an example is because when you run a race, you can see the race results publicly. So if you run a race, you're not happy with your results, look at the results online. So yeah, look at all the people who ran faster than you, but try to use that as inspiration for what you can achieve. But then also look at all the people who ran slower than you, because you're probably not going to be the very last person. And if you are, that's fine. That just gives you loads of room for improvement, little by little. We all start somewhere, but you're probably not going to be at the very bottom. So find at least one person that you're better at than where you are now. And compare yourself. Compare yourself up to inspire yourself, and compare yourself down to also inspire yourself, because you're better than someone else at this. I think that should be able to help to give you some perspective. Like I said, you're probably not the last. So look at where you are on the spectrum. And again, give gratitude for what you can do, what you could achieve. Next, get outside your comfort zone more. So if you've been happily safe in your comfort zone, not stretching yourself, it can be really, really, really scary to get outside your comfort zone. But if you're constantly getting outside your comfort zone and stretching it and expanding and growing, then it makes it easier to do that, because it's like this muscle is used to it's so uncomfortable. Okay, this is the new comfort zone. I find that the more often I do things like that, the easier it is. So get outside your comfort zone more frequently. Stretch yourself. Run longer distances. Run faster. Try to, push yourself to achieve a different time. Walk longer, walk faster, cycle, whatever it is that you do. Push yourself to get outside your comfort zone and do events like races. Doesn't mean that you have to push yourself to win, but being around other people can also help you to get outside your comfort zone. I found that when I ran the race last October, it was a 10K. That was the first race I'd run in 18 years, I think. And I was so insecure about all the people that were passing me. It was a really challenging route, and it was harder than I expected. And again, it was the first race I'd done in almost 2 decades. And so it was challenging, it was tough, and I walked more than I wanted to, and people were passing me, and I felt bad about myself. But it was good, because I got outside my comfort zone, and I performed in front of other people. So like usually when I go out for a walk or run, I'm alone. So it's like no one sees how fast or slow I am. But doing this in front of other people really triggered my insecurities. So why is it good to trigger your insecurities? Again, so you can do the mindset work to improve your self-confidence, self-esteem, and release these feelings of not being good enough. Finally, what else can you do about imposter syndrome? Revisit your why. And did a podcast episode about this a couple months ago about knowing your why for your outdoors adventures. That was episode 382. So revisit your why. Why are you doing your outdoors adventures? Why are you doing your hobbies? Why are you doing this? And really get clear on that, because when you get clear on that, that can also help to release imposter syndrome. Because if this thing that you're doing today is just one step towards a bigger goal, it gives you some perspective, and it can help you release some of that perfectionism. So I have given you a bunch of things you can do to release imposter syndrome. And these things, even though I'm talking about them in terms of outdoor adventures and hobbies, these techniques apply to your professional and personal life as well. So celebrate your successes. Be grateful for what you can do. Forgive yourself. Compare yourself both up and down along the spectrum. Get outside of your comfort zone more. Do the mindset work for your self-confidence, self-esteem, and to release that limiting belief that I'm not good enough. And revisit your why. So you're going to have a why for everything you do, whether that's personal, professional life, hobbies, adventures, whatever. So it's worth revisiting that. So that was it for today's episode. I would love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced imposter syndrome in terms of your hobbies, your outdoor adventures? How did that show up? What are your limiting beliefs? Please drop me a line and let me know. You can email me at holly@hollyworton.com or find me online and get in touch there. Thank you so much for listening. And please remember to visit hollyworton.com/397 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Worton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollyworton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. That's patreon.com/Holly Worton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.